Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by MView, LawView's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm David Lancelot, your host, the CLO and EVP advocacy at LawView. And I have the great pleasure to have with me today the CLO of DHL Supply Chain Americas, Mark Smolik. Thank you for joining us today, Mark.
David, it's a privilege to join. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and I'm really looking forward to having the conversation with you with regard to our industry, where it is headed, and some of the more exciting developments that we're all reading about and living day to day. So thank you again.
Me too, Mark. Me too. It's been great to meet you. I met you at the Running Legal Like a Business conference last year in Las Vegas. I saw you and Elaine Dar presenting together and separately, and I was so impressed. It's one of those moments where I just had to go up to the stage, and stand in the line of people, hoping to get a chance to speak to you, and I did. I think I spent an hour speaking to Elaine afterwards, after her talk. And we've had the great pleasure to have Elaine on the show too, which was wonderful. And after the Running Legal Like a Business conference last year, I was able to attend your conference, the DHL Legal Innovation Summit in what I have to say, always beautiful Columbus, Ohio. I'm a huge fan of Columbus. I always tell everyone. And we got to meet again there. I had a wonderful time, super inspirational event. And I got to say, seeing you leading your legal and business team through that event really showed me some, tremendous leadership characteristics, I got to say, right? Having the whole team up there, all the different groups, the data scientists, the project managers, all that kind of stuff. It was just fantastic. So, yeah. And after that, I thought, I got to get Mark on the show, and you very kindly agreed to be here. So thanks for being here today.
Well, thanks again. And our summit was a great team effort. I surely could not have done it without the team. And of course, it was a better summit because you were there, and I appreciate it when I called you out, someone out of the blue, and said, come up on stage and you have an opportunity to share some insight with regard to where our industry is going. I vividly recall meeting you at Connie and Jeff's event last year. And it was the only time that I had an opportunity to share a stage with Elaine at an industry event like that. And it was a really, really good experience for me. It was one that when I provided my opening comments, I literally stood there, if you recall, kind of on the side of the stage and just let Elaine shine. She did a wonderful job. She's been with us now for what will soon be 15 years, and a very, very integral part of not only where we have gone as a department, but more importantly, where we are going, particularly as we continue to leverage AI and technology to do some pretty exciting stuff here at DHL.
Yes. And I think it's a great measure of the sort of brand of a team, the impact of a team. When you have people like I did come up to you, some of the people that I respect the most and are the most sort of modern in our industry, and say, I want her job. It's just like, me too, actually. Very cool. Yes. So why don't we kick off with getting straight to the point of this show. Legal leadership, modern legal leadership. And I'll ask you, because I think you're one of the most modern in the field at the moment. What do you think are the key characteristics today of a modern legal leader, Mark?
Boy, it is so shifted. I've been in-house, David, since 1990. So here we are 35 years into it. And I've had the opportunity to work for 3 companies during that period of time: Sherwin-Williams, and then Safelite Autoglass, where I served as GC, and of course here at DHL the past 16 years. I'll answer your question with a little bit of a twist. What I saw at DHL when I joined was what I learned at the time was a very, very traditional view of the law department. A group of lawyers that were called on when needed to either support a project, handle a piece of litigation, or perhaps give advice here and there. It was very reactive, not very proactive. And as I joined Safelite, and now had the responsibility for leading a legal team. But dysfunctional team when I joined, I found that there was more of a business approach, more of the expectation, particularly as industry was beginning to continue to evolve, CFO and CEO thoughts with regard to the legal function were beginning to evolve and mature. And I surely found that at DHL, where there was more of an appetite, not just to have the lawyers sit at the corner of the room at the board meeting, but really at the table, providing insight. And boy, David, I vividly remember very, very early in my tenure here at DHL, when we were in the boardroom and one of our business people were presenting their overall financial performance and their plan for the next year. And I had a question that had nothing to do with legal. Now, most people in that room really didn't know, it'd been coming 60 days. But you got a pin drop. And I got a little nervous because I asked a question that had nothing to do with law. It had everything to do with business. And the reaction that I got was, we don't expect the lawyer to ask those kinds of questions. And I said, well, that's me. Mm. And it set a tone. And it set a tone that has lived with me now for the entire 16 years that I have been here. Legal is not just here to provide legal advice when needed, when necessary, when appropriate. We'll provide insight to the business and find an opportunity, not just to look at risks, not just to handle a claim, not just to provide that uncompromising quality legal service, but really find a way to partner with the business to help them drive their agenda forward, and doing so in a very persistent way that evaluates the risk, evaluates the learning opportunities with regard to claims, matters that we have handled in the past, and helps guide the business to avoid pitfalls, overcome hurdles that we've experienced in the past. With regard to the most important characteristics, number one, be curious. Step out of your box. And in some regards, be a square peg in a round hole. Don't just sit there as a lawyer. Any one of us could go to law school. We can memorize as much as we can the theory of the law, but you've got to approach it with a very balanced, pragmatic view with regard to how to accomplish a business objective. So curiosity is very, very important. Number two, think like the business. You're there to promote them, anticipate what their needs are, anticipate the questions that you're going to ask. The more you are with an organization, the more that you'll understand the culture, the way of thinking, what expectations are of people, and how you can anticipate what their needs are and helping them advance their interests. That's number two. Number three, do what you say when you say you're going to do it. That has everything to do with trust, confidence, and integrity. You want to be the person that is reliable. You want to be the person that is calm under pressure. You're the one that if the next COVID-19 hits or some major incident happens at the organization, when multiple people are reacting and emotion is getting ahead of people, you're the one that wants to be the calm under pressure, to not be afraid to tell people, let's take a step back, evaluate the situation, and get the right key stakeholders involved so that you make an informed, sustainable decision going forward. But going forward, David, and here's what I think is most important, and that is, don't be just reactive. Yes, there's a service that needs to be provided, but what is ahead of us, particularly when it comes to the legal industry, is a whole new frontier. We've talked about data in many circles within the legal industry, and every one of us either has it still in traditional file cabinets or more likely somewhere on some computer or system somewhere. The data is really going to be the new gold standard for going forward. That data that we have that is really leveraged by the very entrepreneurial thinking CLO or head of legal operations, or even any level within a legal department, is really what's going to help create a perception in the minds of the business that we are learning from the past. And what has happened in the past, assuming it may replicate itself, we're helping the business meander through the various pitfalls, the traps, the minefields that could lay ahead, and really helping support the bottom line.
Couldn't agree more, of course. It strikes me that 16 years ago, my experience of in-house practice 16 years ago was very, very different, I have to say, from your way of of operating. And I assume it's not, exactly the same now as it was 16 years ago. But for me, back in the, early 2000s, certainly, and I think for a lot of in-house lawyers still these days, there's this sort of role as the air traffic controller for law firms. Very reactive, not a lot of insight or input into, strategic business decisions. Sort of where our friends in finance were maybe 30 or even 40 years ago when they were called back office bean counters, right? Nobody calls the CFO that anymore, right? Not if they want to keep their job. Because pardon me, the CFO is sort of the CEO in waiting these days, right? They didn't used to be. And I think they've been through a transition, and HR and marketing have been through a transition that we are currently going through in the in-house legal function. And some of us are further ahead, and clearly you guys at DHL Legal are cutting edge. Some of us are somewhere in the middle and learning from, the people who are out in front. And then I think the vast majority are still in a more traditional role, particularly outside the United States and within some sectors in the U.S. Where we're looking for role models, and I mean that's basically what this show is about, right? So it always interests me. What was it along your journey that sort of gave you that cutting edge model a little bit earlier? Let's say maybe a lot bit earlier. What was it that got you into in-house practice in the first place? And did you have any role models or I mean, it sounds like the culture of the organizations was also really important.
It was huge. I'll dial the clock back a bit. When I got out of law school, I went to go work for a very small law firm, 3 associates, 10 partners. And that experience came on the heels of me working construction, David, just coming out of high school, all through undergrad, and then all through law school. And it was custom home building, and I worked for a builder. And then as I entered into law school, started my own trim carpentry business. So I went into business for myself. And that's the second foray of really working for myself in that capacity. But it really began to lay a lot of the foundation with regard to how I think from a business perspective. Was it a big business, but I still had a P&L. I had to account for, make sure I balanced the checkbook, make sure there's cash to pay people, etc. But when I ultimately decided to leave the law firm, it was because of an opportunity that I saw printed in what we referred to back then as the local Ohio Bar Association reports. It's a little booklet that came out every single week, highlighted the cases in the various jurisdictions throughout Ohio, but in the back was some advertisements. And then, lo and behold, I turned to the back page and I see an advertisement for a position at the Sherwin-Williams Company. And I had always admired the company. And I remember calling my wife and said, I'm going to be home late. And I typed up a resume. 4 weeks later, I was working at Sherwin-Williams. The best move I'd ever made. Now, I can remember one of the law firm partners at the time, when I was still working at the law firm, said, "You're crazy. Why would you ever want to do that? You're not going to do anything but supervise people like us." And then I got to Sherwin-Williams, and boy, was the world different. Sure, it was still the traditional law department, but it did most of the work, including some of the most complicated M&A work in-house. And it proved to be a tremendous learning opportunity for me, not only the M&A's front, but securities and advertising and multiple other things that the company gave me the opportunity to learn from. And that really gave me insight into how to build a business. My clients were internal, right?
Sure.
The more and more I was working with them and partnering with them, and whether it was domestically or internationally, and I did spend about 10 years of that 13 years traveling around the world doing M&A deals, but it really gave me an appreciation for what it means to be a service provider in an organization, and more importantly, creating a perception of value. Now, I didn't know much more than that. I came to work, I did my thing, day in, day out, but eventually got the itch and safely out of last call, moved the family from Cleveland, Ohio down to Columbus, and started there with a broken law department. It was one where the former general counsel had been asked to leave the company for a couple of things that tripped him up, but we had to rebuild the reputation of the law department. That was not easy. And for me, it was more about creating the perception of integrity, trust, and everything else that comes along with it that is since then carried with me throughout my time here at DHL. You know, when I started here, David, we were a team of 5. And you referenced in your pre-comment before I started speaking, with regard to the traditional law department and really being an air traffic controller of external counsel. That's exactly what existed here when I started. When I would ask for a file on a matter, I was told, let's call outside counsel, time and time again. And we said, that model's going to change. So we have completely changed that. So much so that we are spending less on outside counsel now, 16 years later, than we were 16 years ago. And we have built the internal discipline and the team here throughout all of the Americas to really be as self-sufficient as we can. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still complicated matters.
Sure.
The mergers, the acquisitions that we don't do in-house, because I'm the only M&A guy here. But we do use external counsel. We use them quite consistently. So it has given us the opportunity to really build that business. You remember what I talked about being entrepreneurial? I mean, when you're working for an organization our size and you are spending as much as we were, you look at that as your P&L and say, what more can I do to really help drive efficiencies and reduce those costs? And we have built a business from one where we had 5 employees just looking at the law department to one where we have almost 90 now throughout the Americas. So it's been a great ride in that regard. So a little bit of a long-winded explanation.
Oh no,
to your
super insightful. I've heard before. I mean, I imagine you also look for this in people's backgrounds for your own team. But this idea of having business experience before practicing law, whether it's, or even sports experience. I had one amazing team member who was a competitive ice dancer as a young woman. And of course that matured her well beyond her years. Right. But to have business, I had somebody who had started his own company, selling things online. And it just gives you such a different perspective to the traditional undergrad law school, law firm, and then straight into a company. Yeah. So I think it's fascinating. The construction, my father was in construction, so I have a lot of construction industry background, but that's really fascinating. And I could see how that would actually be helpful going into Sherwin-Williams as well.
Well, it really was. When I went into Sherwin-Williams, I had this idea. It was my idea. I didn't know if it was going to work, but Sherwin-Williams had a real estate development company. And I thought, wow, to take that construction experience, I could go build buildings, but I'd love to work on the industrial commercial development team. Well, 9 months later, they disbanded that and outsourced it all. But it still led to some phenomenal opportunities that I otherwise couldn't have anticipated. So it's taken me in directions that I never knew would exist, but it has also really solidified the principal fundamental building blocks, the foundation for my career.
Right on. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. And then I think there's also a theme to having to rebuild a function. I've heard that before as a sort of accelerator, right? Like if you come into a place, I have a friend who's been on the show, and he had the opportunity to rebuild a function because the previous GC had been indicted, and had to go, right? And so he had to rebuild the function there as well, and it sort of gives you that push to think about what should it be, because I think until very recently, very, very recently, we haven't had a discussion as what I think of as an almost new profession about what the purpose of the legal function actually is, right? And if you don't have something to push you forward and say, actually, Mark, we need you to rebuild this function, why is it here at all? How would you answer that question? Why are we even here?
Well, at its core, to provide uncompromising quality legal services. That's number one. Never lose sight of that, right? Never. But that don't provide the service from your perspective. Make sure that you understand what the business, your customer, your client really wants. It's going to be different for multiple businesses. Well, here at DHL, we've got multiple business lines, our consumer group, our retail group, all led by different people, different CFOs, different presidents / CEOs. They'll all have their own expectations. You know, with some with buttons to push, you know, with others what not to push. You know how they think, you know how they really want their team to respond. And the more and more you can be attuned to that, the more and more the value perception you're going to create in their mind. One of the best pieces of advice I have ever received in my entire career was from a retired CFO, retired at the end of last year. And I was struggling pretty significantly with a request from our CEO at the time, who said, everybody coming to my board meeting comes with one piece of paper. And on that piece of paper is everything having to do with their business and their function. Well, what I was struggling with, particularly when it came to the contracts or the projects that we were working on, some of them were week after week, month after month, sometimes year after year, especially with some of the litigation. So my one piece of paper, David, became stale after about 3 months. And I went into my CFO, his name was Scott. My CEO's name was Scott at the same time. And Scott, CFO, I said, I'm struggling. I don't know what to do here. Because this is, you know, I present, and it's pretty clear people would rather be on their phone when I am. He said, stop presenting it. He said, I'll talk to Scott, CEO. We'll get you through it. And I did. And he said, here's what I want you to keep in mind. When you walk out of the room, when Scott and I are both talking to you, and we look at each other and we say, good hire, that's all you need to know. Manage to our perception. Whatever you do day in and day out, never lose sight of this basic human reaction, no matter what level the organization is at, is their reality, is their perception of you and your team. And I've never lost sight of that. And the reason I say it's so invaluable is because it's true. It's basic human reaction. We all have first impressions of people. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're lasting, right? But as that perception we nurture day in and day out, that is our reality. So I have continued to stress that within my own team. And when you ask what are some of the more important things that people really need to keep in mind when they're at any level of organization, whether at senior level, is make sure you understand what the expectations are so that you can manage to them and continue to foster a very positive perception of you and your team.
Right on. I couldn't agree more. I also like the theme of building that relationship with the CFO. I've always found that the CFO is probably one of my strongest partners in the organization. They have a sort of aligned purpose with the legal function, right? They're protecting the organization from a financial perspective and a legal perspective. And we're, assisting them and they're assisting us. So I think getting in there and building a strong relationship with your CFO and the entire finance function really is pretty fundamental to being a great modern legal leader. And that sort of segues me to I think another sort of fundamental part of the modern legal leadership role, which is the not the substantive part, I guess I'd say, the operational part, right? And I think more and more, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, more and more we're seeing that job descriptions, headhunters, I'm sure some of them come your way. I know you're very happy, but I'm sure they're bouncing off you all the time. They're bouncing off me, and their job descriptions are both substantive, leadership, often transformation these days, as we've discussed, modernization, but also building and leading a modern, what I call the scalable engine room of the legal function. So tell me your thoughts about what that engine room is these days and why it's fundamental to a modern legal function.
Well, right now, the engine room that is really getting the most attention in the industry is anything having to do with AI.
Sure.
You put those two letters in front of contracts or e-discovery or what have you, you're grabbing people's attention. With regard to the modern engine room, it is always going to be fueled by some of the fundamental building blocks that you and I talked about: trust, integrity, and doing what you say, etc. And making sure that you never lose sight that you are literally a decision away or perception away from a light switch that can often end your career in an organization or not. And I'm not saying that there's a draconian way of thinking, but under the heading of what's in a name, whether it's your name, David, my name, or anybody else that is listening here, you have to understand that your name precedes you in everything that you do, and it creates that perception in the minds of people. So those folks that are really looking to the law department, who are thinking of you as that true partner, who's always got somebody's back, who's not afraid to roll up their sleeves and to get down in the trenches when needed, who remains calm under pressure, are the ones that are going to continue to advance their careers in a very, very significant way. But understand, you can't do anything alone. You referred to my summit. Boy, I'll tell you, I gave that opening presentation. I know you were there sitting in the audience. And if you recall, I then just stood in the corner of the room and I let people shine. And boy, it was among the most exciting things that I've experienced in quite some time. To see some folks that otherwise would be very, very reserved, standing in front of almost 200 people and sharing their insights is really, really a proud moment. It's when I realized that, a lot of the hard work, a lot of the ideas that are generated, when you allow people to do what they do best and then you get out of the way and let them do best, you've really got a recipe for success. And when I look at that engine room that you're referring to, just know that if you use the analogy of an old locomotive where they used to shovel coal into the fire, the more and more people that you've got shoveling that coal, all being part of it, getting that train moving in the same direction, the better off that you are overall. But I want to just add a little bit of a twist. That engine room, where's it going to take you? When it comes to our industry, boy, I wish it was 40 years old. But if you and I were having this conversation 10 years from now, it's going to be way different than it is now. We are on the cusp of a change. And that change is happening at a pace that I have never seen in 35 years. If you look just at the past 12 months, how many articles have been written and posted professionally to LinkedIn and multiple other social media platforms and either private media. There have been more written in the past 12 months about where the industry is going than there has been, quite frankly, the past 12 years. There's many, many people that are wondering, where are we going? There's many, many that are going to fight where we're going. Those that embrace it in a hyper-competitive environment, whether you're in-house or external, are really going to be the ones that prosper. So let's chat just a little bit about what all of this means with regard to where this industry is going, because I think the change is going to be very, very significant. And dare I say, within the next 5 years, it will be radically different than it is right now.
Yeah, I think of it as a transformation that we've seen and felt, you for at least 30 years, me for 20 something years now, but it absolutely feels like it's accelerating. And I think, you've got generational change, you've got sort of a philosophical change that you've seen in different legal functions and that you've implemented yourself. And then, of course, there's the technological change. And I think those three things coming together almost, right? It's almost like we've got the new people coming in who are digital natives, as well as technologies that are finally able to sort of take some of the work off our plate in a more direct way than some of the more legacy stuff, are all leading to this pretty dramatic acceleration in change. Where do you see that going? Where do you see us getting to?
Well, where I see us getting to is a dramatic shift in several areas. First and foremost, just talk about efficiencies, right? And if I may, I'm going to put a question out there or a statement out there that I'd like to explore a little bit. And that is with regard to AI and all the talk about AI and technology and where things are going. I can only imagine that there's a lot of people in-house that are still wondering, where do I start? I hear all this great stuff. I hear what DHL is doing and Duracell and multiple other organizations, but gosh, they're so far ahead of me. Well, understand that the most fundamental building blocks that you have, particularly with regard to riding the AI train, is data. You all have it. Could be on a laptop, it could be on a smartphone, it could be. But you have to understand that you can't do much with any of these fancy tools. That's what I love about talking about the construction analogy. Without data, you can't build a house without a foundation. Your data is your foundation to everything that you want to do with regard to technology and AI in the future. So before you go and talk about some shiny tool in the toolbox, whether it's Harvey or something else, if you're wondering where to start and you want to build a foundation for yourself going forward, especially in a sustainable way, look first at your data. Talk to the people that can help you organize it. Talk to people if you don't already have it, but out your management systems. Organize your data in such a way, rely on the experts to help you structure it so that when you do decide to take the step, the plunge, put the step into AI or other technology, you've got the data that you can extract. That's what these tools are going to do. It's going to help you take your information in your department to streamline your operations and do things that you've never been able to do in the past. And we have time on the call today, David. We'll talk a little bit about that. But what I see happening is those organizations of whatever capacity, doesn't have to be a law department, heck, it could be a financial advisory firm, it could be a medical provider, then leverage that data and augment it with what I refer to as augmented intelligence. The technology are those that are going to really continue to drive efficiencies and savings in the future. I really believe that 5 years from now, if not before, the typical attorney in a corporate law department that has embraced organizing their data and AI will find themselves 50% more efficient just because of the tools and the platforms available to him or her. Not working more hours, hopefully less hours, but doing so in a much more structured, disciplined way.
Yeah, no, and of course I agree. I think it's one of the things that, as you say, there's a lot of focus on the shiny things and not on the pretty difficult in many cases work of structuring and cleaning up a lot of the data that has been just sitting around. I mean, it makes me think of GDPR and legal telling the business, you have, 70 marketing databases, you need to clean those up. Oh, how long can we wait to do that was the question back then, right? How much further can we push that into the future? Now it's actually the business that wants us to have structured and accurate information so they can use it with whatever shiny tool they have. But it's actually more beneficial to us to have that data put into in a structured repository and more accurate, because of course the AI does much better in that environment. And I think that's how we're going to get, as you say, that's how we're going to get to predictive intelligence. That's how we're going to get to significant efficiency. But I see it all the time. I mean, I was actually speaking to someone at the conference recently who was telling me when he started at his new company as GC that they had paper boxes, 14,000 records in the basement. So a lot of companies have a long way to go, right? And they cleaned that up. And as you say, you don't have to do that yourself. I think that the challenge is often seeing that future that you're talking about and seeing how predictive intelligence and AI can be valuable if you could just get the data from here to here.
Exactly.
Yeah. And one of the themes Elaine Dar and your team spoke about quite a lot was partnering with the data scientists in your organization, the people that actually understand this stuff, and giving them the understanding how important this information is to legal and how valuable it can be to the business.
Yeah. We actually hired a data scientist on my team. And that person, and there are multiple others in the legal, is generally referred to as legal ops. We refer to it under a different acronym, is charged with the sole responsibility of just making sure our data is organized, structured, and interpreted in a way that we really can pull something meaningful out of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very unusual for a law department to have it. Now that we do have the data organized in a way, you got to have somebody to interpret it. So we just shifted some resources to make sure that we have the wherewithal to fund that role.
Yeah, and I think that's becoming, for me, more of a characteristic that I would put against cutting edge in-house legal functions, is that if they have someone who's dedicated to the data, role, right? And I find it almost similar to the situation you have with a marketing team or a sales team, right? Where you have operational people whose role it is. And of course, we have people like that too at our company, right? Who are there to import structured data and ensure it's ready to be used for the purposes of the business. There's no reason why legal shouldn't be doing the same thing to catch up with our friends in finance and sales and marketing and every other part of the business.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, we've got financial analysts. Their role is look at historical and current data to help us predict what's going to happen in the future, or if not, to at least adhere to our reporting obligations. So
absolutely.
What time are we caught up with following that model? No, but it's one that, at least for us, is here to stay.
Yeah. I have a friend who says that legal is the last function to be SaaSified. Basically meaning we're the last function to get on this train of almost like technological transformation into a place where all of this information that we've traditionally kept very siloed is able to come together in the cloud and be shared with the rest of the business and used for its highest value to accelerate the overall business, really, as opposed to just get the job done in legal.
And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, more and more heads of legal and surely legal ops are talking much more frequently about targeted operating model. How do we want to operate going forward? I mean, David, traditionally work came in, work goes out, right? An old manila folder got open, got stuck in a file cabinet somewhere. You never did anything with it. If you had good memory and recall, you remember what you did in a project, right? But you had to sew two and two together to come up with something to be used in the future. But now that data is sitting there alone, it means nothing. Harvested and mined the right way. It's what you can really, really leverage going forward. So I want to come full circle because I know that there have been many, many people ask me, well, where do I start?
Yep.
First and foremost, put a set of blinders on. Don't get enthralled with the shiny tool. If you go to Legal Week or any of those types of tremendously valuable industry conferences, and you walk through that grand convention hall, and you see everybody hawking their wares, you get confused. Boy, I'd love to go through those as a young general counsel and then call David and say, David, tell me what I need. There's 50 different e-discovery tools. Tell me the one that works the best. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that. But more and more people that are running law departments are realizing that there's a dawning of a new day. And that is because more and more CFOs and indirectly more CEOs are understanding the art of the possible with regard to their own business and leveraging technology to help them make those decisions. And they are opposing that way of thinking, that view, further and further down in the organization, including legal, for many, many years. And I saw this at Sherwin-Williams. We would rely on external counsel to tell us what the latest is with regard to how to handle a case, what we should be doing for e-discovery, what the latest technology is, et cetera. And it was only probably the past 7-8 years that I began to realize that if there's technology being used by law firms, it's to bolster their bottom line, not to reduce my hourly rates, not to reduce the efficiencies that trickle down to me. And I can't blame them. They got a business, they've got margins to protect. So too do I. But a lot of what the shift that we're seeing, and we'll continue to see, it is buyer of legal services who is always on the receiving end of being dictated by the seller of services, what those terms are beginning to shift ever so slowly. Now, don't get me wrong. When you talk about that targeted operating model and you look at the very top, where there's 20% of the work that comes through a corporate law department, high value, high risk, complicated M&A deal or bankruptcy or financial transaction, you're going to always have the law firms that you're going to need. And you're not going to be able to shift a lot of those buy-sell dynamics. But with regard to everything else, what I'll call the commodity type work, the mid to lower value, high repetition, you're going to find more and more law departments dictating how it is they're going to do business with the seller of the services. And you'll see more and more of that shift. I know we're doing more and more of it and making some progress. We have a long way to go as well. But I see that, particularly as a check on the ever-increasing hourly rate and the affordability factor when it comes to the buyer of the services, the corporate law departments being able to pay for it.
I know. Yes. Well, I think, and I've said this before, I think we're at a tipping point in terms of expectations for legal leaders, for everybody in the in-house team, really. But the tip of the spear is the person at the top who's sort of carrying the purpose and the vision for the function. And I think, as you say, I think the reason we're at this tipping point is because finally the business leaders have experienced or have been told by someone, maybe it's a headhunter, maybe it's a peer CEO. Legal can really be of enormous value to your business, right? Like, I've seen it. Do you know this guy, Mark Smolik? Man, he's doing some great stuff, right? Like, we need something like that. And so now when they go out into the market, and I just have some examples that I've seen on recent job descriptions, proven track record for reaching more broadly across the business, playing a leadership role beyond the general counsel function, right? That you wouldn't have seen that a few years ago, right?
No.
Like, beyond the general, what does that even mean, right?
Right.
Beyond the general counsel function. Building scalable systems and policies to maintain compliance, et cetera, et cetera. Scalable, like a lawyer who knows what the word scalable means. So I think that's the tipping point when senior people in the market are looking out there and going, oh, I need to have these, 5 characteristics. And hopefully more junior people are going into teams where those are the driving factors, right? And the purpose is, competitive advantage, driving the business. We're here to do a lot more than be air traffic controllers for law firms. Yeah. And I think maybe that's my segue into sort of my final question for you. I know you do, obviously you're very well known in the space for your leadership. I'm sure you do a lot of mentoring. You're extremely generous with your time, including today. So I wanted to ask you, what are the themes, the advice that you're giving to people that you're, mentoring at the moment? What from law students onwards, what that should they be thinking about? Maybe 1 or 2 things that you would say to focus on.
Well, for those thinking of entering our profession, except for 0809, when things were a little challenging, I said, welcome to the most wonderful experience that you could potentially go down when it comes to a career choice. So the world really is your oyster if you want to mix a business approach, guiding the business to decisions that just so happen to be based on a foundation that you learned in law school. And that is a very rewarding experience. But when you do so, you have to come into that role with a bit of humility. You have to come into that role with a very pragmatic approach, because we can find lawyers, and this applies to every level in the organization. We can find lawyers that can tell us the theory of the law. But I can tell you, if you ever sat down with a business leader, let alone a CEO, who asks you a question and you regurgitate the law and then you shut up, you will be tuned out immediately. You have to find a way to yes. There's always limitations to that, right? But your job is to help prosper the business, and advance the business. And the more you are in tuned to that, the more that the recipient of those services will be tuned in to you. And as you are going down this path, never, ever hesitate to ask for feedback on a given matter or a given project, and always try to find that one mentor. For me, it was my CFO, my retired CFO. And by the way, the CFO from DHL that you saw sitting on one of our panels, Mark Kuhner, he is now our CEO.
Oh, wow.
In June. So you talk about a dynamic shift, and it's pretty exciting time here at DHL. So for me, David, the opportunity to share some insight with you is tremendously valuable. You said a lot of flattering things. Realize that none of them can be accomplished without a tremendous team. You can remember going to a World Series game many, many years ago. Cleveland Indians were in the World Series. That's how long ago it was. And I watched Mike Hargrove, standing in the dugout. And I looked at him for the entire inning. All he did was stand there and watch 9 people do their job. And I realized now how invaluable that lesson was to me, because that is exactly the approach that I've taken. The right people on the field, let them do their job, explain what it is that's your ideas, what you want to accomplish, and always get out of the way. And the more and more people that I think that realize that about them, it's about the us and the we, the more and more I think collectively, particularly as an in-house team and environment, we're going to do a lot of great things here in the future.
Thank you, Mark. I couldn't agree more. It's been wonderful having you on the show. I look forward to seeing you again soon. And thank you, everybody, for listening today. This has been the Legal Leaders Podcast. See you next time.
Thanks, Dan.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawview.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.